What's going on, man? I'm Logan. Welcome to my home kitchen. I'm going to show you how to make a pan-seared pork chop that has a lot of flavor, stays tender, and most importantly, retains a lot of moisture in it, right? So it's important to note that pork chops all come from the loin of the pig. The cut that we're focusing on today is the ribeye chop, or some people just call it the rib chop. It has bone in, and it's going to give this pork chop an insane amount of flavor as it sears off, you know what I mean? So when you're picking pork chops out of the store, make sure that they have a nice pinkish color to them and they have a good amount of marbling throughout them. You want to stay away from pork chops that are pale in color and have dark spots either in the fat or in the bone. Very first thing you want to do to the pork is giving it a dry brine. You can go 8 to 12 hours, minimum of 6, right? So pat the thing dry completely on both sides and sprinkle very generously with kosher salt on both sides. And you're gonna leave this in the refrigerator uncovered, 6 hours minimum or 8 to 12. I mean, you could do black pepper too, that's not gonna hurt anything. This is a thicker cut, about 1.5 inches thick, so make sure to get all the sides also with salt. We're gonna end up searing a little bit of that fat cap too. Salt's going to help penetrate the meat of the pork, giving it good flavor, and it's going to also help tenderize it. And then when we go to pan sear the pork, it's going to give the pork a nice caramelized crust on that side of it, which I absolutely love. So after you do dry brine the pork, it's very important to remove it from the refrigerator and let it sit at room temperature for about an hour. You want to pan sear this when it is at room temperature. The beautiful peperonata I'm going to serve it with, which is basically an Italian stewed dish recipe made of sweet peppers. I'm using mini sweet peppers, tomatoes, shallot, herbs, and of course a lot of garlic. So there's your shopping list right there. Go ahead and jot that down. Of course, the recipe will also be written in the description for you. All that being said, let's get to it. So while we make this peperonata, go ahead and set that pork aside and let it come up to room temperature. Peperonata is amazing because it really highlights the natural, beautiful flavor that tomatoes and peppers have, especially in the summertime. When you are serving pork chops, you want to make sure that A, you serve it with the sauce, or B, serve it with some sort of a condiment that's going to really highlight the natural flavor that the pork has, and it's going to help enhance the moisture that it has. So peperonata definitely nails that category. This is a very simple side dish to put together. It takes about 20 minutes, and this is all you do. Get yourself a bowl or some sort of a container to put your vegetable scraps in. Helps keep your work area nice and tidy, and of course, if you have a compost bin, then toss them in the compost. After giving the peppers a wash, cut the tops off. I love these mini sweet peppers. They have such a great flavor. Very similar to that of a bell pepper. As I'm cutting the pepper in half, take note of how I'm holding the knife. It's riding against that front knuckle on my finger and my fingertips are tucked in. This may take practice, but you'll definitely never cut yourself once you get used to it. As I'm cutting the peppers in half, I'm taking a look in the inside of the peppers themselves to make sure that they are not rotten or getting moldy or anything like that. I want to highlight the natural sweetness that these peppers have, so removing the seeds is going to eliminate any kind of possibilities of them being a little bit bitter. I found that using a paring knife to scrape the seeds and the placenta out of the peppers is a very fast, effective way to do this. I mean, these are not hot peppers, so don't be afraid to use your fingers as well. Once the inside of the peppers are cleaned up, then go ahead and cut them into thin strips. Next on the prep list is 1 shallot. Cut both ends off, cut it in half, cut the shallot into thin strips. After the shallot, we have 5 garlic cloves. Remove the outer papery layer, cut the root end off, and give the garlic a thin slice. 2 heirloom tomatoes is next. You definitely want to use a good tomato. These are very delicious, especially in the summertime. I'm just going to cut these into large chunks, no rhyme or reason or really any kind of formal size on the tomatoes. I don't necessarily find it that you have to remove the seeds from the tomatoes, but if that is an extra step that you want to take, then of course, by all means. Everything is cut up and placed into its own dish, nice, clean, organized, ready to go. Now for the cooking part. Stock pot set over medium-low heat, 2 tablespoons of oil go in. Drop in the peppers, hit the peppers with some kosher salt. The salt helps pull out that natural flavor that the peppers have out, so you definitely want to season in layers, of course. Hit it with some freshly cracked black pepper as well. I have a couple sprigs of fresh thyme as well. I'm pulling the leaves off of the stems and I'm pinching the leaves in my fingers just to release a little bit of the oils and then dropping them in with the peppers. The thyme is going to really give this dish a nice earthy balance. Continue to cook the peppers over the medium heat, stirring occasionally until they become a little soft. That'll take about 3 to 5 minutes. Once the peppers start to soften up, go ahead and drop in your shallot. Give the shallot a pinch of salt as well. Again, the salt is going to pull that natural sweetness that the shallots have out. This is what I call seasoning in layers. We're seasoning everything in each of the cooking stages, and that's going to help us get a really full-bodied, full-flavored product at the very end. Once the shallots turn translucent after about a minute and a half, go ahead and drop in the garlic. Sweat the garlic for about 30 seconds until it starts to become very aromatic and the rawness is cooked off. Once that happens, drop in the tomatoes. Go in with the apple cider vinegar. We may need to add a little bit of sugar at the very end of the cooking process, but I'm going to hold off for now. I want to taste this after everything gets done cooking and adjust the sweetness from there, right? Give it a little pinch of salt and some freshly cracked black pepper. And now you want to bring the cooking liquid up to a simmer. The tomatoes and the peppers are going to release a little bit of their own liquid as well. If it looks like you're going to need a little bit more cooking liquid, I recommend adding a splash of beef stock. You could use chicken stock as well. I find that this is better than adding water, as the stock adds a nice touch of umami to the dish. Once that liquid has come up to a simmer, put a lid on the stock pot and keep it over medium-low heat. I'm going to go ahead and push this to my back burner on my oven. That way we could cook the pork chop, right? Which should now be at room temperature. I'm heating a cast iron pan that has a nice thick bottom on it over medium-high heat until it literally starts to smoke. Being that the salt has drawn out liquid from the pork chop itself, we're going to have to pat this thing dry on all sides of the pork chop, okay? Before we drop it into the pan. Into that cast iron pan, I go in with 2 tablespoons of oil. I like to use canola oil when I'm cooking, and I'm going to sear that fat cap on the edge of that pork chop first. I'm going to render some of that fat down. That way we could cook the pork chop in its own fat as well, which equals more flavor. Just a little bit of brown on there is more than adequate. Drop in the pork chop, and we're going to cook this for about 6 to 7 minutes per side, because this is a very, very thick piece of meat. Of course, cooking times will vary, and you may or may not need to adjust the time. I'm looking for that beautiful crust, just as you're seeing right there. That is absolute perfect flavor, and I absolutely freaking love it. Crunchy, caramelized crust on the outside of the pork chop, and nice, tender, juicy meat on the inside. On this side, I'm going to cook it for another 6 to 7 minutes. I mean, like I said, you may or may not need to cook it that long. It kind of just depends on how hot your pan is, how thick your pork chop is, a lot of variables. I check the temperature of the thickest part of the chop, and I'm looking for about 125 to 130 degrees. That is about a medium rare pork chop right there. If you're good with using your fingers to check the doneness on the pork chop, you could also do that as well. Once it becomes that temperature range, I like to drop in 2 tablespoons unsalted butter and some fresh thyme, rosemary, and sage as well. I like to do this part in the last minute and a half of the cooking time, and you're going to baste the pork chop with that melted butter as it starts to brown. Top the pork chop with some of the fresh herbs and baste that hot butter on top of it. We're basically extracting the flavors that the herbs have, and it flavors the pork. It basically just perfumes the meat, and it gives it so much incredible flavor. Once the pork chop is done cooking, put it on a plate, let it rest, and drizzle some of the hot butter over the top as it rests for about 10 minutes. All said and done, this process took about 20-25 minutes, and by that time, this peperonata is fully cooked. It smells so good. That's really nice. I mean, you taste the acidity from that apple cider vinegar. It's perfectly seasoned. You could definitely taste like the full flavor profile of all those ingredients. Salt enhances flavor in food, right? So we salted them in stages. The end result is a dish that tastes absolutely amazing. You have full flavor profile on them. It's good. You might have to add a pinch of sugar to it or not. You just gotta taste it after it's done cooking. This has a really nice sauce on the bottom of the pan too, you know. You got those stewed peppers with the garlic and the tomatoes and the shallots, and then you have this beautiful natural sauce that was made. It's just being emulsified with the oil and the liquid that was extracted from the tomatoes and the peppers. Now my favorite time has come, which is plating this dish, right? So you put the pork chop onto your favorite plate and top the pork chop with some of that beautiful peperonata. Very, very colorful, very bright, both in color and flavor. This pork has such a nice amount of flavor to it, from it being dry brine and then being pan-seared. It has a nice caramelized crust on that side of it. It's perfect. Beautiful, tender, juicy pork chop, and that peperonata really hits this out of the park. Happy cooking, my friend.